What's up guys, welcome to Wasted Space, and we're back in Space Engineers with another episode of the Building a Fleet series. And I've gone back to bombers because the one I made last time functioned very nicely as a light bomber, but its penetration on the actual projectiles was relatively low. And I wanted to experiment a bit further with the idea of continuing with super duper cheap projectiles and very light bomber designs, but see if I couldn't make something that packed a bit more of a punch and also was a bit better capable of defending itself. So what I have in front of me here I'm calling the Dandpatta, which is basically the big brother of the Qatar. It's another fisted blade, but this one's a full-on sword. And that's supposed to represent the fact that this is shooting big long blocks of heavy armour. Now we're going to try it against a couple of different targets in this video. We've got some light armoured stuff and we've got some heavy armoured stuff. And you'll be able to see that these things are dealing much greater penetrative damage than the previous light bombers' projectiles were. But because of this, it's necessitated a bit of a change to how the whole thing's been put together. Of course, the advantage of the light bomber with the merge block setup is you had the merge block and then the merge block itself kind of became the projectile. In this scenario, where you want a long, thin projectile, the merge block's going to be a big lump sticking out the back. And so I've had to completely change how the projector system works to one where we're using welders and grinders as the sort of build and separation method, and then some landing gear that are toggled at just the right time to grab the projectile as it's ground away from the ship. And this kind of has the benefit that not only are we now able to make long thin projectiles that literally have no blocks on them other than armour, as all they are just one long thing of armour which is super cheap, but because of how it hangs off the bottom of the ship it can behave much more like a sort of typical maybe rocket strike would behave, where you can swoop in on a target, release these things during the swoop and then pull up away, allowing you to get away much more quickly than one where you have to switch your dampers off in order to achieve the same effect. So as you can see, these things do a reasonably decent amount of damage for what they are. I mean, it's just some blocks of heavy armour. The advantage of sticking them in a long row is you've got greater mass and it's much more precise where you're hitting things. And you combine this with the fact that this ship is very easy to be precise with this ship. There are a few bits of weirdness due to the fact that the cockpits are on their sides, so it's best to fly it using the remote control that's on board and the camera. But yeah, that was necessary to fit in with the aesthetic and keep the entire body of the craft as small as I could possibly make it. But aside from that, it is pretty effective, and it does some pretty scary damage for what it's firing, and these things can be fired from a very long way away because it's nice and precise. If you fire these things at an area of the ship that is very heavily armoured, you'll do some decent damage, but the best use of them is to fire them at an area of the ship where there are some armour, but then the far side of it is some nice, juicy critical components, which with the precision you can do reasonably easily, because these have a habit of not only punching through the armour, but then you'll still have some of the projectile left and it will be bouncing around inside, causing further damage, and at times these lovely big chain reactions where that bit then hits something critical inside, which explodes and blows up a whole load more stuff. The design of this has kind of been designed around the projector building component. I always tend to work on that because it tends to be the largest part of a bomber, is how the projectile itself is all built and put together. And then in this case I was able to equip it with some Gatlings and some reloadable rocket launchers, so it's kind of capable of defending itself even when it's not loaded up with rockets, which is a bit of a difference to the light bomber, but of course intrinsically makes this one a bit more expensive. One last thing that this sort of weapon component can do, and I've actually got that in the world above me just here, so we can go over and have a look. It's got some engines on it and so on, so I could just do some vague tests. But you can see that it's quite a small part, and because of how it's been designed, it can be used in a modular fashion. So we could, in fact, very simply just take a copy of this and paste it onto the side of the other one. Okay, perhaps not quite so simply as I can demonstrate it here, but you get the idea. This can be modularly fitted onto other ships or onto itself. So there's the idea that I could reuse this weapon system for maybe a larger bomber, or perhaps even for some sort of static turret if it was equipped with gravity as well. But you can see kind of how it's been put together. So you've got the landing gear which have been lined up, and they were a bit of a pain to get sort of just the right position so this all worked. Initially there was actually 4 projectiles being welded at once, but couldn't get the landing gear to sit quite right. And then the other important part of this is these 2 grinders here. They've got to be in exactly the right place, but they've also got to be on rotors. That just splits them off from the grid of the main craft and means they can actually grind it. And other than that, it's been a bit of jiggery-pokery getting it all to sit at the right parts. One thing I have made use of is welders actually have sort of an aura of welding. So you can see here, you wouldn't think that those welders are pointing at it at all. But if I was to jump up in the cockpit up here and just turn those welders on. So control panel, turn those welders on. You can see that actually it's more than capable of grinding away the sides. More than capable of welding up along the sides there. And at the moment these landing gear are off. But you can now see how those would very easily clamp on the second this bit at the back is broken, and it's considered to be a different ship. So a relatively simple structure to it, but I'm quite happy with how the end ship turned out, and I'm quite happy with how it looks as well. It's not quite in theme with the rest of the fleet, partly because, in order to make it in theme with the rest of the fleet, I would have had to have made it a lot bigger just for the sakes of aesthetics, whereas as it stood, it fit very nicely to just fit some turrets on the side like this, which kind of look alright, and then just build a frame around it and make it as small as it possibly could be for the sort of ship it is, to the point where I think it's actually lighter than the light bomber. So there you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed this one. Another take on the bomber approach, and I'm very much enjoying kind of refining some of these new techniques for making very cheap projectiles, rather than the old techniques that I used to follow, which was basically stick loads of warheads on it, and that will be fine. The advantage of these is obviously the turrets don't really like to shoot at them because they're a moving object. They're not owned by anybody. And at the same time, if they do shoot at them, it's a lump of metal. It's never going to blow up my ship. And to be honest, they're actually quite difficult for turrets to do any noticeable damage to, because it's heavy armor. As you know, the only thing that's going to hit those is Gatlings. And Gatlings don't really do that much damage to heavy armor. So if you did like this one, please hit like, please hit subscribe. Really does help me and the channel out. If you didn't, let me know what I could improve, what I could change on the design perhaps that you think would fit better. And of course, this will be up on the workshop, so don't forget to go and check that out if you fancy having a look yourself. So thanks a lot for watching, guys. I'll catch you next time. Woo!